Welcome to Research Renaissance, presented by the Karen Toffler Charitable Trust. Embark on a journey into the forefront of cutting-edge brain science as we feature insightful discussions with a diverse array of guests, from early career researchers pioneering groundbreaking science to influential voices in investment communities, policymaking, and research institutions. Together, we delve into neurological diseases, their causes, treatments, and the quest for cures. Join us in advancing our understanding of the brain and addressing its ailments. Welcome to Research Renaissance. I'm Deborah Westphal, your host and guide through the fascinating future of the brain. Joining me today is Dr. Theodore Zwang, Assistant Professor of Neurology at Massachusetts General Hospital and the Harvard Medical School. He is also the recipient of the 2023 Toffler Scholar Award. I can't wait to hear about his research and his perspective of the future of brain science. So let's delve in. So welcome. We've known each other for a few years. Through this discussion, may I call you Ted?
Oh, yes, that would be great. It's really wonderful to be here, Deb, and have a chance to talk to you about all the cool stuff that we've been working on.
Yeah, and I'm excited to share because we've had several conversations, and what you're doing, I think, is fascinating and exciting. And you do have a wonderful way of bringing complex ideas and simplifying them for our listeners and just for the general public. So I'm very excited for this discussion. So I want to just start with what inspired you to pursue a career in brain science, and maybe those specific moments or those connections of influence that really kind of ignited your interest in what you're doing today.
Oh, wow. It's certainly a complicated story when I think back to all the things in my childhood and in college and things that I absolutely loved about science. But I think it really started with some video games that I was playing when I was a kid. There was a game called StarCraft that I played on PC with a bunch of my friends. And it's got this futuristic society, varying degrees of complex war types of interactions. But beyond that, there are some really cool ways that these different groups in the game use technology to better themselves. There was one that I really liked playing, a group called the Protoss, and they had these cybernetics that let them do all sorts of weird things like control plasma blades or drive these spider-like dragoons. And when I was a kid, I just thought that was the coolest thing. So, I always knew that wasn't possible today, but maybe there'd be something I could do to make that possible tomorrow.
Yeah, that's really cool because my son was influenced early on by playing video games and in what he's doing. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that kind of feel that same way. And so, tell us a little bit about that journey then, as you transition from this interest into college, into just the really long journey of becoming a PhD. Like, what was that like, and what were some other key influences?
I think one of the weirdest things for me is how I got into research to begin with. When I was in college, I didn't really have the intention of going down the path I did, going to get a PhD in chemistry. What happened was my freshman year, I had spent some time at Pomona College, where I went for my bachelor's. Over the summer, I worked for the Office of Campus Life, and that involved helping people with housing and forms and spending a lot of time answering emails and phone calls. And honestly, it was just such a fun time being on campus over the summer that my sophomore year, I was trying desperately to figure out another way that I could do that. And eventually I talked to my organic chemistry TA, TJ Lane, about what I might be able to do. And he introduced me to professor there, Mal Kiat Johal, who wanted me to join his lab and start doing some chemistry research involving like physical surface type chemistry. And I remember thinking about what they were doing and just thinking, wow, that sounds so incredibly boring. Sorry, Mel. They were doing these things called layer by layer deposition, where they basically take a little wafer. You can imagine it like a silicon chip, and they dip it in a solution, wait 5 minutes, dip it into another solution, wait 5 minutes, and then go back and forth 1,000 times before they were able to test them for different things. And I thought, there's no way. But fortunately, Mal, gave me the time of day and talked to me. Okay, well, what do you want to do? And we had a conversation and discussed all the things that I was interested in. And he, I'm very grateful. He gave me a chance to try and do things that I was interested in that he would help oversee. And that summer was just absolutely amazing for me. It was a time when I felt like I had the ability to just explore. And there was something that I was curious about. I could try to figure it out. There were a lot less stresses than you have now, for sure, as a professional scientist. But it was just such a great experience, just being in a research lab over the summer and getting to try and answer questions about what was going on, that it led me to feeling like I just had to do this. I just had to find ways I could keep doing this. And over time, I was able to refine my interests and figure out, not just what I was interested in, but also there was certainly a little bit of a feeling that if I was interested in it, I also wanted to be able to talk to other people about it. And that led me to, research that I did during my PhD, trying to understand the ways that certain proteins in our body help detect and repair mutations in DNA before they become cancerous. And then eventually, after a bunch of exposure to the kinds of new science that people were doing, realizing that there was some incredible novelty in the things that people were doing with brain machine interfaces. And it just felt, it resonated with that child in me, that feeling that, wow, we actually can do this now. We can start to try and make these interfaces that can help people. We could start to use them to try and understand what's going on in their brain and fix things that might have become damaged or sick in some way.
Yeah, it took you back to your StarCraft days and taking that and actually making it a reality. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's funny because I still remember as a sophomore talking to Gabby Heller, who's someone that I work with pretty closely, and saying, no, there's no way none of this is possible. Like, people can't do these kinds of things. And now I feel like I need to put my foot in my mouth because I'm seeing people do all of these things daily.
Yeah, that's create in the future, right? You're doing that. So you have mentioned before in some of our conversations about another influence was your grandmother, and your grandmother having Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that influenced your fascination with the brain?
Yeah. Well, as a postdoc, this was when I was at Harvard, already starting to make electronics that interface with the brain to try and study the brain. I was working on projects trying to look into ways to make that interface better and less harmful. And at a point during that, my grandmother, I remember she was living down in Florida, was starting to have some fairly severe problems with her memory and was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And there was a whole lot of really complicated things around that, ranging from people trying to take advantage of her to my family trying to move her up to the Northeast to be closer to them so they could help take care of her, to having conversations with her about what was going on in my life and having to repeat and be patient and calm, and her not remembering anything that we talked about the next time we talked about, and just so many different aspects of it that, it's hard. I think anyone who has had a family member that is progressing through stages of dementia knows just how hard it can be to see that happen. And I had thought to myself, the technology that we're developing, it really is perfect for studying diseases in the brain that take place over long periods of time. And something like dementia, whether it's from Alzheimer's disease or various other causes, doesn't manifest instantly. And that can make it really difficult to study with technology that only lets you really look at things at a single time point. And that's when I had really become just fascinated with the ways that I might be able to study the trajectory of Alzheimer's disease, see if I could use this less invasive brain machine interface to look at what was happening in the brain before, during, and after pathology had started to spread, to see if we could really understand what's going on and maybe treat it and monitor it and watch it as things became better. And yeah, it's that was several years ago now, and I have to say I'm still really enthusiastic about doing that kind of science.
Yeah, it's very touching when you live with it, or you have a loved one that has it, these diseases. And my grandfather, he died with dementia, and the just kind of the person just kind of fades away, and or at least he did. And it's really devastating to those around, and the loved ones. So I appreciate you kind of sharing that, and I can understand why that's that was a real influence, is being up there and close. You stated early about this. Your goal is to understand how this aging neural system that we have, how that causes cognitive dysfunction in Alzheimer's and in dementia. And you've talked about this brain technology interface. For some of the listeners, it may conjure up, sci-fi and, metal caps on your head and probes in the brain. Can you talk about that in a way of where that technology is and what you're doing in your lab, and maybe even a little bit about where you see the technology going in the future?
Yeah, so when I started my postdoc, I was very lucky to work in the lab of a man, Charlie, who had been one of the kind of founding fathers of nanotechnology. And he had this vision of taking really, really small devices, making them as close to neurons as possible, so that when you put them in the brain, your brain wouldn't have any kind of upset interaction with them. They wouldn't get, some kind of inflammation or rejection that you would typically have with implants that people would put in the brain. And so I helped further develop that technology and took it into this really cool direction, I have to say, where we were able to make them into this neuron-like shape. So they have little recording devices that are the same size as a neuron soma. It's like main body. And then the wires that then extend from it are similar to the axons of the neuron. As a result, we can put these in the brain, and it is effectively invisible. Your brain doesn't get upset, it behaves normally, and you're able to record that normal behavior over long periods of time, on the order of months to years, that were really difficult to access before. That's not to say that any of this is easy. We're able to do this, but there's still a lot of things that need to be done to do it even better. So there are a bunch of people that I'm working with now to try and make this technology better, get it into more people's hands who are trying to study other things. There's work that I'm doing trying to use this to study different aspects of Alzheimer's disease, where we can see what happens in a brain when it's happy and healthy, look at what then happens as soon as pathology is introduced, Alzheimer's pathology is introduced, and see how the activity of the brain changes. So one of the things that I've been doing with that I'm actually quite excited about is I've been taking these and putting them in multiple brain regions so that we're able to see how the neurons not only talk to each other within a brain region, but also across brain regions, the hippocampus and entorhinal cortex, which are two parts of the brain that are known to become dysfunctional in people with Alzheimer's disease. And what I've been really curious about is, can we understand this trajectory and understand how that communication messes up? Does it happen early, before different types of aggregates of proteins form? Does it happen later, after all of those aggregates happen? And then I think the best way to think of aggregates, imagine if you have a dirty house. You have a whole bunch of, maybe tissues or paper towels strewn about. If you were to take those and aggregate them in a trash can, suddenly you have a big ball of tissue or paper towels. And that's kind of what we see in the brain in someone with Alzheimer's disease. There are proteins that kind of clump together, these things called tau, which can form these neurofibrillary tangles, or amyloid, which can form these plaques. And it's been long thought that those are defining features of Alzheimer's disease because you'll see them in a brain that has Alzheimer's disease, but not as much in brains that don't. So obviously, something is going wrong, but we don't really know if those things are the main feature leading to people having dementia, or if they happen to be something coincidental that happens after something else goes wrong. So what we can start to do by looking at how things change over time is we can watch as these aggregates start to form, as the trash can gets filled up, so to speak. And then also get a sense, if we take out the trash with some kind of treatment, are we able to then see things recover? Is there a point at which your house is too dirty that it doesn't matter? Do you need to get a dumpster? So it's questions like that I think become really interesting to ask, and that by integrating these new technologies, we will be able to ask.
Yeah. So you said, you talked about making these little sensors the size of a neuron, and we can do it, but it's difficult. First of all, how big is a neuron? I mean, can we see that with the naked eye? How do you create these little sensors, and because they're small.
Oh, yeah, they're very small. So a neuron's main body, a soma, is on the order of 20 microns, 20 micrometers. So if you were to say, look at the projections then, the axons and so on are closer to a few microns in width. So we can make these devices that are about that size. And then if we want to make it so it's similar flexibility to brain tissue, we actually can't make it as the full ball-shaped neuron. Using the materials that we have access to, we actually have to make it much thinner. So we've been using different micro and nanofabrication techniques. Something that's been in the news lately with the CHIPS Act are all of these different crazy facilities that are needed to make electronics and how small they can get them and make them. We're basically using similar types of technology to try and make these electronics. So I'll take a silicon wafer and I'll basically build them up layer by layer using some really fancy stencils and different ways of evaporating metal to create thin layers. So it ends up being about 900 nanometers thick, which is just, again, really hard to imagine what that is. I think the thinnest thing most people are used to is the width of a hair. So if the width of a hair is somewhere around 200 microns wide, then you can imagine a neuron being about 1/10 of the width of a hair, and then the electronics being, a further 100 times or so thinner than that, at least in that dimension. So really challenging.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's just fascinating. So what other kind of difficulties do you have with your research and what you're doing? Not only the state of technology, but are there other things? Is there, of course, I'm sure funding is one of them, but I can think of policy and ethics and things like that. What other difficulties is there in just doing this research?
I think the most difficult part of doing research, at least for me, is this feeling that there are so many things that I want to do that I don't necessarily have the ability to do. And it can often be a matter of either finding ways to access the technology or interact with the people or get the funding to do those things, or finding ways then to, if that's not possible, change the expectations of the experiments, or even sometimes put them off until I'm able to, get the necessary parts in place. I think one of the things that has certainly been humbling for me as I've made this transition, first from chemistry, then to brain machine interfaces, and now to Alzheimer's disease, is the fact that I will never be able to know every aspect of all of those things, as well as some of the people around me who specialize in any individual part. So sometimes it really is the matter of showing some of the things that I've done to the right people, getting them invested in the kind of work that I'm doing, and seeing how we can put our resources together to solve some of these problems that are too big for any individual.
Yeah, that collaboration is really important. It can bring difficulties too, but it's important.
Yeah, and the incentive structure that we have both in science and with funding can make some of that challenging as well. And that's something I'm still trying to figure out and navigate when it comes to things like how you decide authorship on papers or how you decide who gets what money from a grant. It's an unfortunate consequence of the way that our current scientific system is run. I feel lucky that I found a lot of great colleagues that are able to put that behind them, but it still comes up. And it especially comes up when you're dealing with more vulnerable people in the scientific system, grad students and postdocs whose entire careers can be dependent on their ability to get their name on a paper, where their name is on that paper. I had a conversation like that earlier today, and I can relate to that feeling of insecurity, even just a few years ago. And I think it's a real challenge trying to navigate that, because ideally, there would be nothing in the way of having smart people work on a problem together, but making sure that the incentives align can complicate that.
Yeah, and I think that's we could have a whole long conversation about the science process and I think a lot of people just science is important to us. The breakthroughs are important to us. There's good people working that, and there's confidence that it's happening. But when you delve into the real kind of process of doing that science and that research, it's very complex and it's a long term endeavor. You've spent already how many years of your life just educating and training and
Oh, yeah.
experimenting and now setting up your lab? I mean, it's
Yeah,
a
so 14 years ago is when I first started to do science in that chemistry lab in Mel's group. If you don't count, chemistry classes that I took in high school or other things before that. Yeah, 14 years. And I think the crazier part to me is even just thinking back to a year ago, before I had become an assistant professor, how insecure I felt with my ability to maintain a future as a scientist. Because a lot of the way that our system operates are as relatively temporary apprenticeships, whether it's as a grad student or a postdoc. So yeah, it's kind of an incredible endeavor, going through all of these stages to continue as an academic that I think, I wish were different. Because I know so many people that love to do science and are brilliant, but unfortunately weren't able to continue in this way just due to a lack of commitment in terms of resources that would enable them to do that.
Yeah. In 14 years, and you're considered a early career researcher. You're just getting started, and you've already spent half a lifetime already in this, and it's greatly appreciated. People like me that you do this dedication, and it's important that we find ways to support these people that like you that really want to do research and find the breakthroughs and push the science. So thank you for that. Talking about kind of breakthroughs. I know that you're creating your lab and working on the science. Are there any things that you're especially excited for that is kind of happening right now and what you're working on?
Yeah, there's a lot. It's been a really crazy year actually in terms of things that are going on, that I've been working on, especially since I've managed to start working together with a lot of my colleagues at MGH on these large collaborative projects. There's one in particular that I really love, which is a project that I've been working on with Rachel Bennett and Brad Hyman, both at Mass General and Harvard Med School, where we basically looked through a window into a brain that was developing this Alzheimer's pathology, these tau tangles. And we asked the question, do these cause cells to die? And it's really fascinating to be able to have technology that can do that can ask those questions, and then people around me who can help, try to figure out what's going on. And I think it's really quite fascinating to see that we're not necessarily sure what's going on from a lot of the existing science. Coming at it from an outsider, you might think from all of the information that's out there, all the things people say about amyloid beta or tau or other things related to disease, how much of it is based on people just being confident from the information that they have, but not actually certain. And how you can then take some of these new technologies and approach it with a much better view that can tell you, hey, actually, these tangles might not be the things that are killing neurons. And I think that's just such an incredible thing to see. When you're actually able to watch it over time, you can see the tangles form, you can see which neurons are surviving. And I think that's one of the coolest things that we've done, because you're actually watching the same neurons. You're actually seeing a view into a month of their life.
Yeah, you've mentioned that a couple times. This temporal view over time seems to be really kind of a breakthrough scientific technique in itself. Is kind of that film, if you would, or that movie of what's happening. I would imagine that takes that's a lot of data.
It is a lot of data. And I think the other thing to keep in mind with this, one of the reasons this is so challenging, one of the reasons it's so good to have this temporal information is the number of tangles are increasing over time. The number of neurons that are dying, that's also increasing over time. So if you were to take a bunch of young mice and just look at them, and you were to take a bunch of old mice and just look at them, or if you were to take a young person and look at them, and then take an old person and look at them, it doesn't matter which model you're looking at, you'll see that the number of tangles are increasing and the number of neurons that are dying are increasing. And I think that it's really tough to then disentangle, so to speak, what it is that's causing these things to go wrong when there are so many spurious correlations that you might see that certainly indicate something related is happening, but don't give you the full picture of cause and effect And I think really being able to watch these things and ask the question, you know, what is happening to this individual neuron? How is it changing? Is going to let us have a much better idea of what immediately precedes their disappearance, their death, and what doesn't. And I think that's just, going to be something that we'll really want to hone in on in the future and see if we can better understand, well, if not this, then what?
So, just for clarification, for me, as you get older, you have neurons that die. How much of this, but not every aging person gets Alzheimer's. So, I would imagine that that's one of the difficulties too, is to understand what's natural process and what is the manifestation of the disease.
There's really some fascinating work that's been done on this by a variety of giants whose shoulders I stand on, for sure, that look at what is the healthy process of aging, what is neurodegeneration caused by a disease. And one of the things that you see is this really is not a natural process. A lot of people, as they get older, that don't suffer from these debilitating diseases, their brains are fine. There might be a variety of other things happening, but you typically don't just have neurons dying. So, understanding the difference between what's normal and what's not, it can help in terms of, defining a disease. But what we really need to understand is also why it's happening. And I think it's a very easy thing to say that, having parts of your brain decay or die or disappear is really not something anyone wants, regardless of what's going on in their brain. So trying to figure out what it is that's causing those things, and also trying to figure that out early so we can prevent it, is going to be a whole lot easier, I think, than trying to stop it from happening once it's already progressed, or try to recover things that were lost after they've been lost.
So that kind of just leads to, me kind of repeating the question, I guess, in a different way is how do you envision the impact of what you're doing and what your group is doing on society at large, as well as the individual, and what potential benefits do you really see here? If you step out 5, 10, 15 years from now, what impact has it made?
Well, I think in an ideal world, we've figured out, hey, it's this thing that goes wrong. This is what we need to treat, and then find ways to treat it and give it to people. But as I've come to understand, there are so many different things that can go wrong that I no longer believe that it's only one thing. I think that there are many things that can happen, and that many individuals will have a mix of things that are going wrong all at once. So one of the things that I'm really hoping for is that by using the technology we have, we will be able to come up with ways to take people and maybe put them in a VR headset with an electrode cap or something similar, or take advantage of some of the many new really cool ways of scanning the brain that exist or are being developed, and then try and look at these signals that we can track and distinguish between the different things that are going wrong, so we can determine, okay, this is the treatment that this person needs. This is what we think is going wrong. This is what we think they need in order to be better, to be healthier. And then, because we'll hopefully have signals that let us look at these things, we can also see if the treatment is effective. We can look to see if things are improving, or at the very least not getting worse, in a much more quantitative and patient-focused way than a lot of the methods that are currently being applied to try and look at the progression of dementia. I think one of the crazier things for me as someone moving into this space is looking at the types of assessments that are done to try and see how we evaluate if a person has dementia or if their dementia has progressed. And it's crazy that we have all these ways of looking at a brain, looking inside it, its activity, seeing what's happening. And somehow, a lot of assessments are stuck at like 30-point questionnaires, or some vague kind of qualitative document that someone will score but could be different between the different people that are scoring them. So, what I'm really hopeful for is if we can take this technology and see it through, we should have some better ways to both monitor the progression of a disease, but also monitor the treatment of the disease.
How important is it for individuals that, these diseases run in the family, or maybe they're just concerned for whatever reason, or they fear for themselves? How important is it for them to kind of stay up a little bit of the research and the progress, so that they can ask these questions of their doctors, and because there is a large portion of it's just passive, right? You're just, oh, it's going to happen. But there is some very proactive behavior from some individuals that really seek solutions or stay on top of the technology. I mean, what are your thoughts as to what just the general public can do to just kind of be aware?
That's a tough one, because I do think it's both in this and other aspects of science really important for the public to be aware of what's going on. And ideally, the science that's being done is there to benefit the public. But what often seems to happen is there can be, again, some really confusing information out there about what people can do and what's better for a person. I think this is, at least for me, most apparent with all the different diet fads that I've seen over my lifetime, many of which haven't stuck around in any meaningful way. But when it comes to things for brain health, and when it comes to these kinds of issues, I know there's a lot of people trying to do really good things that then get communicated in a way that confuse people who could really benefit from them, or who should be excited by it but don't know why they should be excited by it, or don't realize that something's at an early stage and that it's a hopeful thread that the scientists are pursuing, because it's communicated in a way that makes it sound like, oh, we've already cured this thing, we're done. So I think, one of the things that would be really fantastic is if the communication of this work became better. And I think that it is. I think there's a lot of efforts to do that. But in lieu of that, I think that one of the best ways for people to try and keep up with what's going on with science and what people are doing with it are taking advantage of some of the different public health initiatives that exist to try and inform the public, or looking at all of the scientific information that's being made available to people. One of the things that I really like, anytime someone asks me a question that's outside of my purview, I'll go to PubMed, which is a search engine that you can look through by the NIH, and you can see what is it that people have been recently doing on this. Is there something that has happened recently that's giving people a lot of promise for a treatment for a disease or things to avoid? I know that it can also be confusing for people when they see like the massive amount of information that's spread through that. So the other thing that would really help is understanding the difference between primary literature, secondary literature, reviews, and how there are different forms of scientific communication that are made for different groups of people. If you were to try and search through primary research articles, you'd often see things that only a few years later might get found out to be not completely accurate. And that's usually, not an issue with reproducibility. It can be an issue with, okay, there are new methods that make it easier for us to understand what's going on. And now we know this, and they misinterpreted their results. So instead, looking at things like review articles, I really think is the best way for people to have a better idea of what's going on at maybe a higher level. Because there you'll have experts who are able to critically evaluate a lot of the different things that people have done in the field and say where they all fit in relation to one another. Was one study, for example, that looks at the relationship between, let's say, salt intake and kidney failure, the only one to see that out of several dozen studies? Or was it that there were several dozen studies that all found that salt intake was related to kidney failure? And by looking at these articles and the assessment of experts who've dedicated their lives to trying to understand what's going on, you can have a much better idea of the state of things. And I think that that's really what I wish were communicated better to people, even just this subtle but important difference in the way that scientists communicate with one another that could really help people that aren't scientists see where the conversation is going.
Yeah, I think that's really important, especially in today's environment where there's just so much out there that's probably not very helpful and not very truthful and or relevant, if you would. But so I appreciate you going through that. Just back to kind of circling back to the policy and the funding and what do you, and we don't have to dwell on it, but what do you wish would change to make it a little easier to do your job and keep young researchers in the field? Because we talked about how hard that is. What are the one, two, three things that you wish would change that you think would make it a little easier for you?
Oh man, there are quite a few, but I think the biggest
one, prioritize them.
Yeah, the biggest one, and I think I say this probably because I'm relatively young. 14 years in this, I'm relatively young. Is I feel like the types of jobs that are available to researchers that are working off government grants, that are working in academia, that are trying to progress public health. I think it's unfortunate that the types of jobs available to them are tied to grants that are often temporary and prevent a lot of stability in these people's lives. I think that, like anyone else, scientists are people, and they would appreciate the idea that, if they're studying something, if they're trying to research something to help the public, that their ability to survive in today's economy isn't dependent on trying to make some kind of groundbreaking breakthrough. It's not dependent on trying to publish something incredible or receive some kind of new funding. I think that those types of incentives only pervert science, and it only makes people who are doing science more stressed out. And I really hate to see it. I mean, I can think of so many people that, they want to be scientists because they like to do science. Maybe they don't want to manage scientists. They don't necessarily want to run a lab, but they want to keep using the tools and techniques that they've spent, several years through their PhD developing and apply it to things. It's a shame that there isn't really a great way for those people to keep doing that. Permanent staff scientists in academia are an incredibly rare thing. And I think that's unfortunate. I think we would benefit a lot more from having people that become experts in things, be able to foster that expertise and share it with all of the people around them, rather than feeling like they need to get pushed out and pushed towards something else.
Yeah, and these grant requests, they're not easy to write.
Oh, not at all. The first NIH grant that I received, it's a thing called a K99, at least in coding terms, but it stands for Pathway to Independence. And I received it when I was a postdoc at Harvard. And just writing that thing and finding out what was involved in putting it together and making sure that I covered all the bases, it took a while. It took, more than a month of time, several months actually, while trying to juggle other things. I still remember looking at the guidelines and seeing that PDF was 400 pages long and thinking to myself, what? Like, I hope I don't miss something that disqualifies me in these 400 pages. And, then you put the thing together. And I think at the end of the day, the document I wrote was about 120 pages long.
Wow.
And it's a lot, it's a lot of effort. And it's important to make sure that people that are getting, money from the public are putting effort into making sure their ideas are good and doable and will help people. But at some point, it feels like it's getting to be overburdensome, and it's leading to misappropriation of effort. If all the effort goes towards getting grant money, then where's the effort that can go towards doing science? So, I think it's certainly been an eye-opening experience to me looking at how all that works. And fortunately, I do find most of my time is still able to focus on doing science. But it's certainly an intimidating and unfortunate part of the prospect, how it only gets worse too the more people that you have working with you that you need to try and fund. It's still kind of baffling to me when I see some of the labs that I had admired when I was a grad student that would have, several dozen people working there. Now I look at the grants and proposals and the funding that must go into that, and it's still like a mystery to me, which is weird. I I would have thought at this point, I've been in science long enough, I would understand its inner workings and how all this happens. I have no idea how that happens.
Wow. But you're still positive about it, and you're still loving the science, and you're still pushing for that new knowledge and that understanding and the solutions to help people and to kind of conquer or control some of these just horrific diseases. What advice do you offer others that are just a few years behind you, kind of trying to find their way? Because I'm sure you're mentoring and coaching others too.
Well, I think that there are a lot of things that people can do to be proactive, that about, both progressing their careers, but also making sure that it progresses in the direction they want, and that they're learning things that they want to be learning, to be able to do things that they want to be doing, that can unfortunately get lost when you're just trying to do your best to make it as a scientist. I think this becomes especially true for people when they are entering grad school. They'll have some idea of what they want to do, but they won't have necessarily a lot of experience doing it. And maybe they're wrong about what they will enjoy. And I think that it can generate this feeling of being trapped, doing things that you're good at because it's the way to keep going, that only has negative downstream effects on your life. And I think one of the best things to happen to me was a few years into my PhD, my mentor and advisor, Jackie Barton, she and I talked about some things that I was really interested in doing. That was different from what I was working on at the time. I was really interested in trying to create a spin tunnel junction and see if I could, do all sorts of weird things related to magnetic field effects. And she had a rule that I have really come to appreciate, which is if you wanted to change what you were doing, you needed to convince her. She wouldn't shut it down, but you had to convince her. And part of convincing her was showing your dedication to the idea. It took me several months to convince her, hey, I really want to do this. And hey, I really think this is a good idea, for her to let me do that. And I'm so grateful that she did, because it really propelled me down, making electronic devices and using them to interface with biology in the way that I am now. And I think that something I've seen, as kind of the other side of things, are people who will then go through a PhD, continuing to do the same thing that they were doing, not thinking about the skills that they're getting out of it and whether or not those skills are employable in the kind of job that they want. And then ending up with a PhD, but no ability to get hired doing the thing that they want to do and feeling like, okay, well, I guess I need to go get some more training now to learn how to integrate into this kind of science. And I think that the best thing that people can do is make sure that as they are going through these experiences as a scientist, they are focusing on their own personal growth and the direction that they want to go as an individual. Because if you do things that you like, not only are you more likely, I believe, to succeed at them, but you're more likely to be happy at the end of the day if you have succeeded. Instead of thinking to yourself, oh no, I've done this thing, I guess I need to keep doing this thing. So, I was lucky that Jackie enabled me, that Charlie enabled me, because it really let me focus not just on things that were exciting, but they helped filter the things that I found exciting and put it in the context of the things that I wanted to do so I could end up where I am today and, happy and prospering as a scientist.
Yeah. Yeah. Good coaching and mentoring, good patience, good focus, and risk taking too, because to convince, you've got to take some risk and you got to kind of put your skin in the game on what it is that you're wanting to do and convince people, which I'm sure is pretty important when you're grant writing and trying to get funding for your other research. So those are
Yeah.
they're all good lessons learned. So, what do you wish the general public knew about what you're doing and just the process of research? What do you wish they knew that maybe they're not aware of?
I think that one of the things that I wish more people knew and had respect for were all of the different things that fail along the way to success, especially in science. I often describe it like you're swimming through an ocean looking for a buoy. You're trying to get an experiment to work, and then suddenly you get it to work, and you're there. You're at that buoy. And now you have to decide, okay, which direction do I go in next? And you look around you, and all you have is ocean. And, it can be a challenge to kind of go from one project to another when you've spent so long struggling to get things to work. You finally have something succeed, and then you're back to trying something that's really difficult again. And I think that this is a pervasive thing throughout many different kinds of science. And I've heard some people talk on it in ways that I really appreciate. One of which, I actually don't know this person, but I heard about her on a podcast. I think her name was Melanie Steffen, who mentioned this idea of your CV of failure and how, it's weird that we put these CVs together and we just talk about, the things that shine the best light on us, almost in the same way as the issues that you've probably heard about with Instagram or Facebook, where people will look at their peers and see all of the things that are successful in their life and then wonder why their life isn't that same way. And I think that, as scientists, it would be fantastic if there were more normalization with discussing the failures that we have and having people realize that, scientists are people. They're not ones that have some kind of, sudden genius or inspiration. It typically requires diligence and dedication and a whole bunch of people around you, a network of support to make sure that when you encounter these difficult parts of your career or of your project, that you're able to get out of that and push forward in a good direction.
Yeah. Well, as we kind of wrap up here, just we talked. I mean, you are doing the future of brain research in brain science, but what is the most exciting developments on the horizon that you see? Is it in the technology to understand the diagnostics, or is it in the therapeutics? Is it both? What excites you the most about the future of brain science?
I think the thing that excites me the most is some recent pushes towards openness in science. I think when I look at a lot of the techniques and technologies, not just in my field, but in ones that are adjacent and can integrate well, things like computer science, a lot of things with AI or machine learning or even statistics, and how those computational tools can be integrated with the types of technology people like me are making. And then how that can be integrated into the clinic to try and make, for example, brain machine interface devices that can have a positive closed feedback loop with themselves that can tell you, okay, this needs to get changed. This is how we should change it for the person to be able to use this device, instead of needing someone to manually look at the data and make an adjustment. I think a lot of those are going to be really exciting ways forward for integrating many of the different advancements across these fields. So I'm really quite excited as both the data comes out, so computational people can start to look at the data, as people who collect the data start to better understand the computational tools that exist or are being developed, and find themselves able to actually apply them to their data so they can ask questions that previously were impossible or impractical. And I think that as all of that starts to go forward, we're going to really see, kind of to take the word from your title, a renaissance in research that I'm really excited for.
Yeah, that's great. And again, you circled back to this collaboration or this network of people, that it's not just one, it's many. You've created your lab, you're just starting. How would people get a hold of you, or how would people find, information about what you're doing, or, what you're publishing on? Talk about your lab, and how do you get a hold of you?
So my lab is fairly new. We're getting started, and we're in the process of hiring people and setting things up. You can find more about me. I have a website, zwanglab.com, that I'm in the process of putting together. You can also find information about me through Massachusetts General Hospital and through Harvard's websites. I have a Google Scholar page, which keeps track of most of my recent publications and presentations. And generally, if you want to contact me, I have my email on my website. Feel free to reach out. I think, there's a lot of things that, like I said, I can't do on my own, and would love to have more help or collaborations where we can push some of these kinds of science forward. Or if there are ways that my research can help push your science forward, you should definitely reach out to me. I would love to talk.
Yeah, that's great. I always walk away from these conversations with you just energized and hopeful for the future, and just more informed. You have a nice way of kind of simplifying these very, very complex, just information. So thank you for the time today, and look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thank you, Deb. It was really lovely getting a chance to talk to you today.
Thank you for joining Research Renaissance. For more information and to stay updated, subscribe for more episodes, and visit our website at tofflertrust.org. Feel free to call us if you have any thoughts, suggestions, or just want to find out more about the Karen Toffler Charitable Trust. Until we meet again, onward and upward.